The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
I cannot tell you how happy I am to finally have this interview on the books. It's been something that I've been looking forward to for quite some time. And I get to bring it to you, which is awesome for those of you that are currently listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author. Definitely want to make sure that you all are following us on social media because we got a lot of fun stuff coming up in the next couple episodes of the podcast. And the best way for you to find out is to follow us on Instagram or Twitter. We are at Florida Beer Blog. If you're on Facebook, we're still on there. It's FL Beer Blog. And the interwebs are pretty easy. It's FloridaBeerBlog.com, FloridaBeerPodcast.com. And obviously, we are a proud partner of the Florida Podcast Network, which you can find at FloridaPodcastNetwork.com, which is obviously all of our past episodes and all of our sister podcasts, which are kind of awesome and really ramping up. And it's exciting to hear. So there are few people that can epitomize Palm Beach County craft beer and, in a way, South Florida craft beer more than Fran Andrewlevich. He is a beacon, shall we say, of beer here in the county. He has cut his teeth on quite a few brew systems. In fact, I remember him all the way back after brewing at Irish Times Brewing, which is obviously no longer here. He was one of the brewers that headed up the brew system at Brewzzi, which was in Boca Raton. In fact, he was there for quite some time. When he left, he brought in Matt Manthe, who is no stranger to the podcast himself. He is currently the owner and brewer over at Odd Breed, which is one of my absolute favorites in the state. And Fran left Brewzzi to open the first of what is now 3 breweries under his umbrella. The first is Tequesta Brewing, which has been around for a very long time. In fact, the day that we recorded this was right before they opened up for their 12-year anniversary. So there was a lot of fun craziness going around, but I'm very happy that Fran was able to sit down with us to give us a good insight into his history and opening up Tequesta Brewing, Twisted Trunk Brewing, and the newer one, Steam Horse Brewing, which is just outside downtown West Palm Beach. Like I said, he's fantastic to listen to. He's got a wealth of stories. He said on more than one occasion he needs to write a book, and I kind of agree with him. This is a significantly shorter interview than it probably could have been. It's 2 parts, so this is only going to be part 1 today, but trust me, you're gonna get a lot of stories anyways, but there's so many more stories that we could have gone into. But so without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and let you over to him live at Tequesta Brewing right before their 12th anniversary with a pint of Der Chancellor, which if you know, you know. Fran Andrewlevich from Tequesta Brewing, Twisted Trunk, and Steam Horse. Enjoy. I kind of hate to say this because you're probably going to blush and say no and not like any of this. But in a lot of ways, you kind of are the patron saint of Palm Beach County craft beer, because it seems like every single brewer that I've spoken to in this area, yours is the name that comes up.
I'd say more the old guy.
The old guy. But in a lot of ways, your story kind of mirrors the growth of craft beer here. Now, obviously, you were not the first. because, and taking a look at your bio, it's kind of obvious, but I do want to kind of understand your story a little bit and kind of how you were able to see a lot of the things and create a lot of the things that's really made Palm Beach County craft beer a lot of what it is, which is funny as we're sitting here drinking Der Chancellor, which is everywhere, to say the least. So I guess I will start with this. How did you get involved with craft beer in a section of a state where craft beer really wasn't that much of a thing?
Sheer luck. Originally went to culinary school, went to Johnson & Wales in Charleston, and I got transferred to Palm Beach Gardens.
Okay, I didn't realize. I thought you had gone to the J&W in Miami.
No, Charleston, which is now closed.
Gotcha.
But I came here, so that was 1990. Again, reference the old guy. And there was 21 breweries in the entire state of Florida. It wasn't 21 million people then, but it had to be 15, 16 million people. That was it. So craft, there was no such thing. So I worked at Irish Times, which is in Palm Beach Gardens. I stopped in there one day to have a beer, met the brewer, and he goes, hey, and I said, hey, because I'd made one homebrew batch my whole life. Still to this day, have made one homebrew batch. Gotcha. So I got lucky and got into bigger machinery. It was 5-gallon batch, and it was extract. It was terrible. We put it in the drop ceiling. We did it one night, and then Irish Times was there. So that's basically how it all began.
And so you kind of had a leg up in a lot of ways with a culinary background. How much of that were you able to bring to when you eventually started brewing professionally?
Well, the obvious is, sanitation. The obvious is sensory. So that was automatic. That was just, it was different. It was like the fifth beetle. Now it was hops. Now it was barley. Now it was, alcohol. Now it was maltiness. Now it was, as opposed to flavors you use in cooking. So, but the sanitation, as critical as it is, it's right up my alley, like born with it,
Mm-hmm. Do you think people really know about the importance of sanitation in craft beer? Obviously the brewers, yes, but the people that are coming in and drinking. No, they don't know the amount of work. It's like, you still get it to this day. What a great job. You sit back there and drink beer all day. And after about 12 hours, we'll grab one. But I had once read that brewing beer is 90% sanitation, 10% paperwork.
Probably 95. Yeah.
95. Yeah. Gotcha. That's amazing. I would say that there's a difference between cooking a plate of food and brewing a batch of beer, in that when you cook a plate of food, it's there, it's done, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, you're able to see the finished product and enjoy it that day. Whereas with beer, you've got a long lead time before you determine whether it even succeeded or not.
Right. And very true. And when you start, you're tasting that beer probably 5 times a day because you don't know where it's going. You don't know what it tastes like on day 3.5. You don't, with different things. So yeah, it's till you get a real feel for it. It's in your mind. You wake up thinking about it. You go in, the middle of the night, I just want to make sure it's, that end of it. Whereas food's a little more, even though there's preparation and the time to do it, like you're saying, it's automatic. It's there. It gets consumed. But the beer thing, it's 2 weeks, but kind of in a weird scenario when I came from kitchens, running 20 guys on a kitchen line, doing 700 dinners and just, that whole thing. And then getting into brewing, filled up your tanks. And then it's like, okay, what do we do now? And then the owners, just like, hey, keep the place clean. And I'm like, oh my God, it's the greatest job ever. Yeah.
And what happens if a batch goes bad? Because, as you're making something, I've been with, we're knocking on wood right now, but it's like, and I've been with chefs and they're trying, hummus that they're making that night needs a little bit more. Let's put in lemon juice. Let's do this, use food's a little bland. Let's add a little bit of salt. Let's add a little bit of, paprika, something like that. With a beer, when you're in the middle of a batch, you've got Der Chancellor, for example, and it's coming out a little hoppy. It's coming out a little flat. It's coming, not flat, but it's the flavors aren't what you wanted. What do you do? What can you do?
A bunch of different scenarios. Obviously, if it's carbonation, you can decarb it. If you need to add carbonation, that's one thing. But if the beer isn't right, it's not right. And if a beer's off, and there's nothing you can do. If it's too hoppy, if it's not hoppy enough, you can add fruit to a beer. I've done that on occasion. But if you, again, not, the last batch of beer I dumped in the last 20 years was seltzer. We went into the seltzer game.
I have heard that seltzers are notoriously tricky to make.
Because here's the trick. The idea is to make it taste like nothing, which goes against everything that you're built with. So we did it. So it was even more slap in the face. So we have a brewer here, Dave, and a brewer, Riney, down there. So we all got together and had an assistant, Dan, who was still working with us. And we're like, hey, we're going to make seltzer. And I fought it. Just not a seltzer guy, but I talked to the bartenders, young girls down at Gardens. I go, hey, how do we get the younger crew coming in here? We're a busy place, but let's get the younger crew. They said, you make a great seltzer. This is 3 years ago. You make a great seltzer. They will come. The guys will come. And they were right. So we make it. So we did it up here at TBC. And I said, all right, guys. So basically it's dextrose, 55-pound bags. It's like making Kool-Aid. And so we got up here and we were going to do it with real fruit, keep some kind of pride, and papaya, and we had all this stuff, and we did it. And we're dumping the bags and we're almost mocking the process. All of us. Okay, your turn to put a bag in. We were picking numbers to who was going to put the first bag in. So we do it. Didn't come out. The papaya was just weird. And so we ended up dumping that batch. But literally it'd have been probably 20 years till we've done that.
Gotcha.
But, and again, it goes back to sanitation's key. And then consistency on a smaller brewery, you don't have the controls you'd have at an Anheuser or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really sensory. So it's really on you. And if it is going to happen, you want to catch it. That's why you try it on day 3, 5, 7, and
absolutely. I've gone completely off the rails already, which is great, but I kind of want to continue down this pipeline because it's interesting that the seltzer craze happened a year or two ago, but while it may have died off a little bit, it doesn't seem to have gone away. And I remember a couple of years before that, the big craze were basically alcoholic sodas, like hard root beer, hard cream soda, hard ginger ale, hard, and they're all gone.
Right.
They are gone. Why do you think the seltzers are sticking around?
Well, again, because 5 years ago, 4 years ago, when it first started going, I read a ton on all of it, and that's basically what they said. And I talked to a bunch of distributors nationwide and big players and bigger breweries, and they said, no, it's here, it's coming, it's going to be here, it's going to stay. I think, like anything, the consumer rotates. It's not beer. It's not, RTDs are in now. They'll be good for a couple of years. Non-alcoholics are making a surge. They'll be good for a couple of years. But seltzer, because it was different, it was lighter. And I knew down here especially, it's hot. You're on the boat. You're on the golf course. You're at the beach. It's the perfect fit for this area. But there was too many of them. There's like 100 of them on the market in a year. And they're so one-dimensional. That's why, and that's probably why I don't care for them, except in the morning. And I think they lost their welcome. They wore it out.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay, so let's go back to Irish Times.
Okay.
You are working there. You are getting your feet wet, brewing beers. Since you didn't have a ton of home brewing experience, who are the people that really helped you kind of start to hone a lot of the experiences?
So go back to the
We're going to keep going back.
Without cell phones, without the internet, and there were no periodicals on small breweries. There was nothing. There was zero. So I worked with a guy that was a brewer at Davis, but he was working 3 jobs. He was worn out. He didn't, because sanitation, I knew him. What he was doing, I go, hey, that's what he said. But the beers had this wang to them. And I said, so a couple guys came in from California. Again, when somebody came in from California to brew in Florida, it was a big deal. And Mark, I can't think of his name. He was at Hurricane Reef down in Miami. And then the other gentleman was I can't think of his name, but from Marin County. And they were great. And what I would do is I'd get on the payphone and call a guy up in Orlando, because there was only 18 breweries. So I would call this guy, Brian Baldessano, who was brewing at Beach Brewing on Kirkland Road by the Universal. There was
whoa, I had no idea that even existed.
They made beer for the Mill, which was the first chain. There was one in Winter Park. I think there was 4 or 5 of them. They had a chain, so it was a big system. So I called them, introduced myself. I said, hey, I'll come up and work for nothing. I'd take a pencil and paper, book a hotel room, work with this guy all day. So that's really how it got going. And there was a ton of trial and error, and a lot of things, you look at, because brewing can be dangerous with pressure and with things like that. Like I've made many a mistake. And so much trial and error. I can't tell. I would just try something. And again, machinery wise, I'm not the greatest guy mechanically or anything else. I'm a lot better now. But at that point, just try it. But those couple gentlemen were great. I'm trying to think. Number one. Okay, I go back. Forget those other guys. So Blake Bombin came down to Brewzzi in Boca. That opened in '97. Gotcha. So Irish Times closed. I was the assistant there, and I was brewing at Kelly's in Key West. So that was actually my first gig. Yeah, so I'd fly down on a small plane, stay on a 100-foot yacht. Kelly McGillis owned it. And
in Kelly McGillis, as in Top Gun. Kelly McGillis.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So that was my first gig. And so throw Key West into the wildness. And should have wrote a book then. Small planes, stayed on this yacht that they had. And then I drive the scooter from the airport with the body truck and I got into the underbelly of Key West. I was an alternate on the bocce team on Monday nights at the White Street Pier if they needed me. So you just met a lot of great friends. And it was just that. But so Blake Bombin's working in 97 and he was teaching at Davis, if I'm not mistaken, out in Berkeley or Chico. So he came down, and at the time, without the internet and all that, there were no books. Every book you saw had the glass line tanks of Latrobe and all these big brewery stuff that didn't resonate at all. So with him, he was the internet. If I asked him a chemical question, machinery question, he had the answer. It was, oh my gosh. I went from zero to hero because that guy was that great. And now he's making wine out Delgado or somewhere out in California, but
that's amazing.
Super guy. Blake Bombin. Yeah, remember the name.
Okay, definitely. So you kind of mentioned it. Brewzzi is now open. And it's funny how many Palm Beach County brewers remember Brewzzi very fondly. And so were you their opening day brewer or?
I was the assistant on opening day, yes. And then Blake was going to California and I remember going from $28,000 to $42,000 because Brewzzi was paying big money. So it was a $6 million restaurant at the time. So I was like, whoa. And at the time I was 20. I don't know what it was. Young. And then we opened the second one in 2001 at City Place. So I ran that. And then Ryan, who brews with me down at the Palm Beach Garden store, he took that over when I left.
Gotcha. With a lot of brew pub brewers that I've spoken to, there is a good amount of constriction that they report because with a brewery like Tequesta Brewing, Twisted Trunk, you may have a couple of standards, but you also have a lot of taps that you can play with. Whereas with the brew pubs, they tend to have, X amount of taps, and most of those have to be the same beers every year. You have to make sure that this beer doesn't go away. You have to make sure that the porter doesn't go away. The light lager can't go away. Your pale can't go away. And there's a couple that you can play with, but not much. Is that what you generally found at Brewzzi? And how did you kind of get around that rut of only having a little bit of experimentation to play with?
It's restrictive, like you're saying, but the same reason, one of the reasons I got out of culinary was I got into a corp. I used to open restaurants for that same company and make sure this is the same, make sure that's the same. And there's nothing wrong with it and it works in most situations, but I'm wired a little bit different. So there's no really way around it. You bring some cool bottles in, but at the time there was no really great craft in Florida. There was nothing packaged that was good that you could really branch out. So you just do the best you can with the taps you have. I think we had 7 taps maybe. And like I said, we have 5 core beers. So.
Gotcha. And, not only was it Florida at a time where there was no craft beer, but that was Boca. So it seems like that limited what you could do even with the experimental let's play sort of taps.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it wasn't, there was nothing there. We were the only brewery, and then Funky Buddha opened their small one, years after that. And they were doing some really cool, funky stuff. But yeah, no, you're not straying far from the line there they want their, it's Boca. And I didn't understand what Boca meant. I heard all the jokes and and then I got there and go, whoa.
Absolutely.
It's that.
So as you're at Brewzzi, what was the progenitor for Tequesta Brewing? The place where we are opened up a very long time ago. I don't want to say very long time ago.
Yeah, 12 years today.
Oh, wow. Yes, you are correct. This is your 12th anniversary. And I know, for the blog for as many, many years as it's been around, that was one of the first beers and one of the first breweries that I was just aware of. It's like, Tequesta is there, Der Chancellor is there, Gnarly Barley is there. So what started where we are?
Well, so next door was Matt, my ex-business partner. He's been gone for about 3 years. He was next door at the Corner Cafe, and he had a small little 1 barrel, I believe. And we had met, became friends, and he said, let's open something. And I said, and at the time, the only place that you could sell growlers, I want to say was in Orlando, was the Organic Brewery, Orlando Brewing Company.
Yeah.
So I saw that, I haven't been to Colorado, haven't been out west where you can do that. I go, oh my God, this ever passes that you can do it. Somehow they manipulated the law, got paid for it, got it done. They kind of paved the way in a weird way. Mm-hmm. So I said, Matt, get a growler. If you see our growler filler there, it's the same one that has Victory, and there's probably a couple hundred in existence, but we were the 6th one to get it because I saw it. It's a $25,000 machine, but it
goodness.
works. I mean, the second year we were open, we did 12,000 growlers, and it was insane. So that was kind of that's where it started, was let's do it. And at the time I was running 2 Brewzzis. I was consultant for the Brewnies in Pittsburgh. I was flying down to Ecuador 5 times a year, brewing in Quito. And then I was also training 2 guys in Key West. So there was one gap there in 2 weeks where I brewed it 9 different places, and I was gonna video it, because it was, for me, I'm a little warped, so it's really funny in my head, the whole thing, and all the characters you're meeting, all the beautiful places you're seeing. So, but that was it, and just wanted to do it. It was a leap, because my girlfriend at the time, I go, just so you know, like, and I was, because of working so much, I was making good money and loving it, and I love travel. And I said, we're going to open this now. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And we have a building in the back, which is storage, and it's probably, I don't know, 200 square feet. I said, hey, if things don't, that's where we're going. Like, we'll get a big TV and a couch. And I go, and she goes, yeah. She goes, I go, well, what do you think? She said, I know you, like, you have to do this. So we did it. And at first, technically we were the first brewery in South Florida.
Interesting.
Literally, yeah. So, like explaining growlers to people, explaining, our gnarly barley, which is an APA. Oh, it's a little hoppy. It's 40 IBUs, and as it's evolved, not just in Florida, but in the whole country and the whole world, things have changed. And we were here in the forefront. And those first couple of years but the first 6 months, nobody got it. We had a tin ceiling, which we didn't have sound panels, and it was like a lunchbox. And it was all guys, and it was like, but it was a safe zone because we didn't have booze. We didn't have that. So, but when it started going and people got the fever, it was pretty neat.
What do you think really kind of launched that? Was it word of mouth? Was it just grinding away?
Because again, I mean, the internet was pretty strong then. But it wasn't like it is now, where everything's on, on Twitter and on Insta. And it was totally word of mouth. And this town's 5,000 people. But they support stuff. They're super local. Okay.
I was going to ask how Tequesta was in the early days terms of supporting.
Well, imagine this town. It was all older people. And so the grandkids would come down, and that was the splash of youth you'd get here. We went to the council. And if we didn't know one of the council members, bless his soul, Jim, who used to run the Legion down here, just down the street, who was our plumber, electricians, there was votes, and we came to them and said, hey, we're going to put a brewery. And they thought it was going to be like The Simpsons, like it was going to be this factory, sweatshop. We're like, no, it's totally different. So because of him, he influenced, and we had made a deal with, hey, we'll give you all our business. We had this whole rigmarole that we had to go through, go to the town meetings, and people just shaking their heads. But then they got behind it, and then the mayor was a regular in here, and we had just the council, and even to this day, like, they love, like, that we get to do these events in this parking lot is partially because they love us.
That's awesome. And how close to the opening did we finally come to the beer that we're both enjoying, which is everywhere in South Florida?
People love Chancellor.
Dear Chancellor.
Well, it started next door when Matt had the corner. It was called the Kaiser originally, but the Kaiser, if you go back in the time machine, was Avery had the Kaiser, which was their big, I forget what it was. So I said, well, we better just do this now. I'm not sure how the name thing's going to be trademarks and all that back then. So we did it. We brought it over here, but we introduced, I don't know if you know, but we do a single decoction on this. And all our lagers that we do down at Twisted and here, we do a single. So it's got this nice little extra level that we do it. So it's a really painstaking beer to make. But yeah, really 12 years in the making, this version of it. And they're like, this one's a little different than one we do at Twisted. We do this one a hair more Play-Doh, a little more alcohol, another 2 or 3 just out of style. So now we're canning, we're bottling it, and we're just, It's crazy how much Chancellor we sell.
And I was always curious because being a Kolsch's tend to not be the signature beer. It tends to be, there's a couple places up north that have a brown ale signature, but it's mostly here's the IPA or here's this or here's that. I was wondering, is the fact that the Kolsch was the one that really took off mainly a function of the time that it was created and the people that you were trying to attract?
Yeah, at that point you needed a crossover. Like I said, gnarly barley at 40 IBUs was hoppy to some people, Yeah. And so we knew it was the transition, and with the decoction and what we do, we were using all whole hops back then, like really went to extensive measures to make it, what we think is a great Kolsch. So yeah, but the times more kind of dictated that.
And of course, because it is so popular, part of me, there's plenty of breweries that have gotten rid of their signatures and, created other things and sort of moved on. And I would ask as to whether you have ever wanted to kind of move on for Der Chancellor, but I guess the question more is, would you ever be allowed to move on from Der Chancellor?
No.
Or would you basically face an uprising?
That would be stupidity, because we think about what we've seen in 12 years. We've seen, when it was the bitter IPAs, and now it's the hazies for the last 7 years. We could have jumped on any of the trends that those are. And it's just our thing, and we've been doing it. And there would be a riot in the streets, but that would be a great April Fool's to come enjoy your last Chancellor.
Oh my goodness, I don't even want to be a part of that. So it comes time for you to grow the business. It comes time for you to sort of not move on, but to expand. And there's been a lot of other breweries that have done that. Funky Buddha is a great example. Prison Pals and Doral is a great example. But with a lot of those locations, this is our same name, but we are opening up a second location. So they're both the same business. When it came time for you to expand, you decided to go a completely different route, because we have Tequesta Brewing here, and then a little bit south of us, instead of Tequesta Brewing down there, that is now Twisted Trunk. That was always Twisted Trunk. It always kind of came in as that separate sort of entity. To start with, why not just Tequesta Brewing Part 2? Why
Tequesta South? It was a discussion. It was a thought. But at the time, going back to the time, we felt there was, 9 miles away that we could do a whole new set of beers. We could do a whole nother thing. Again, like, this is super local. That is super local there. There's a lot of people that go between, but they're both super local. And it was the time. I mean, Tequesta doesn't, if we put a Tequesta in Miami, does the name, I think maybe if the name was a little different, or if the name was Palm Beach, or the name was, then it would have been an easier push as well. But we figured there was enough room to do something individual, different set of beers, different set of people. But it could have seen it either way.
So that is part 1 with Fran. Trust me, there's so much more to get into. We will be releasing the second part of this very short, woefully underdeveloped interview. It probably could have gone on for a week and a half. In fact, after we turned the recorders off, the stories kept coming, and I probably should have recorded all of them. We'll be releasing the second part of that interview next week, so make sure to follow us on social medias. If you're listening to us on a podcast app, please follow and subscribe. Make sure those notifications are on. You'll be the first to be notified when it drops. Also, if it has a rating on the podcast app, please give us a nice 5-star review. We do appreciate some of those 5 stars that I was seeing on Apple Music or Apple Podcasts. Very happy about those. Thank you so much. Make sure to tell your friends and your buddies and your family about the Florida Beer Podcast. Every little bit of word of mouth helps out. We will see you next week for part 2 of our interview with Fran Andrewlevich. Our intro announcer is Jeff Brozovich. Field producer Steve Pekala, executive producer and Grand High Poobah of the Florida Podcast Network is Jemmy Legagneur. This is Dave, your host and author. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next week, and drink Florida craft.